In the frozen Ural Mountains, a group of experienced hikers entered a journey that would end in silence, fear, and unanswered questions forever. 9 students set out on a ski expedition across harsh Soviet terrain, confident in their survival skills and prepared for extreme winter conditions. Days later, their communication stopped completely, leaving no indication of distress, only an empty silence spreading across the mountains they once crossed. Rescue teams were sent into a landscape where the wind erased every trace, as if the mountain itself refused to reveal what happened. What they discovered first was not survival or hope, but destruction scattered across a frozen campsite that made no logical sense. The tent had been sliced open from the inside, suggesting panic so extreme that escape became more important than warmth or safety. Footprints led away from the camp into deep snow, showing the hikers walked barefoot into conditions that should have been instantly fatal. No struggle. The marks were found near the tent, only confusion preserved in snow, as if time itself froze the final moments. Searchers followed scattered tracks across the mountain slope, realizing the group had split under unknown pressure that no one could explain. The deeper they advanced, the more the mountain revealed signs of chaos that contradicted every known survival pattern in extreme cold environments. Later, bodies were discovered far from the campsite, each positioned in ways that suggested sudden collapse rather than controlled movement or survival retreat. Some victims showed injuries far beyond what falling or freezing could cause, raising immediate questions that investigators struggled to answer clearly. There were no signs of external attack, yet internal damage suggested forces so intense that normal explanations began to fall apart completely. Radio silence had not been accidental. It had marked the beginning of something that unfolded quickly and left no survivors to explain it. Weather reports confirmed extreme cold, but not enough to account for the full extent of physical destruction found across the mountain site. Investigators arrived with expectations of avalanche or exposure, yet every piece of evidence challenged those assumptions at every step of analysis. The frozen terrain held no clear avalanche pattern, leaving experts divided as they attempted to reconstruct the final hours of the group. Local military presence in the region added another layer of uncertainty, as classified activity nearby raised questions no official report fully addressed. Photographs recovered from the expedition showed calm expressions before disaster, creating a haunting contrast with the devastation discovered only days later. The mountain remained silent through every investigation, offering no answers, only wind and snow that continued to erase human understanding. The deeper investigators studied the case, the more contradictions emerged between physical evidence and every official explanation ever proposed. Each new analysis seemed to widen the mystery instead of narrowing it, as if the truth itself was resisting discovery. Some researchers pointed toward a sudden natural force, yet the pattern of injuries did not match any known environmental disaster. Others believed military testing in the region could have triggered panic, but no confirmed records fully support that theory. The survivors were all gone, leaving only broken silence and scattered clues, buried beneath layers of snow and time. Even the position of the body suggested confusion rather than escape, as if direction itself had been lost instantly. Clothing was found shared between victims, implying desperate attempts to survive in conditions far beyond human tolerance. In the valley below, searchers reported unusual aerial phenomena that later fueled speculation across scientific and civilian communities alike. However, no official source ever confirmed anything abnormal in the skies above the mountains during that period. The investigation continued for months, but every lead eventually collapsed under closer examination of physical and environmental evidence. The tent itself became central to the mystery, its internal cut suggesting panic driven from inside rather than outside force. Experts debated whether internal pressure, sound waves, or unknown environmental shock could have triggered such extreme behavior. Yet none of these theories fully explained why. Experienced hikers would abandon shelter in lethal freezing conditions without hesitation. The mountain environment preserved evidence like a frozen archive, but interpretation of that archive remained deeply contested among experts. Years later, declassified discussions hinted at possible secret experiments, but nothing concrete was ever publicly confirmed or verified. The case gradually transformed from a search for truth into a symbol of unexplained human vulnerability against nature. Families of the victims waited for answers that never fully arrived, only fragments of conclusions that raised more questions. The incident began to spread beyond scientific circles, becoming a global mystery discussed in documentaries and investigative research. With every retelling, the story grew darker, shaped by uncertainty and the absence of a definitive explanation. Even modern technology has failed to recreate a fully consistent scenario that matches all discovered evidence. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains frozen in time, a case where silence speaks louder than every attempted answer. As decades passed, new generations of researchers returned to the case, hoping modern science could finally unlock what the past could not explain. Advanced simulations were run on weather patterns, terrain structure, and human behavior under extreme cold, yet results still failed to converge into one truth. Every reconstructed scenario broke at the same point, where human logic could no longer explain the sudden collapse of order at the campsite. Some experts suggested a rare atmospheric event, powerful enough to disorient perception and force irrational decisions in extreme panic. But even that explanation struggled to account for the physical injuries that went far beyond exposure or environmental collapse. The frozen landscape preserved every detail with brutal clarity, yet offered no narrative to connect the scattered evidence into a single event. Investigators revisited the tent site in later years, finding that time and snow had erased most remaining physical traces. Still, the original reports remained consistent in one detail: the sudden and violent evacuation from within the shelter itself. This single fact continued to challenge every theory, regardless of scientific or speculative interpretation across decades of analysis. Meanwhile, public interest in the case grew, transforming it into one of the most discussed unexplained incidents of the modern era. Books and research papers attempted to reconstruct the final hours, each adding new layers but never removing uncertainty. Some interpretations lean toward human error under extreme stress, where fear alone becomes powerful enough to override survival instinct. Yet experienced hikers are rarely known to abandon shelter without overwhelming external pressure that demands immediate escape. The absence of clear external attackers deepened the mystery, eliminating straightforward explanations of violence or direct confrontation. Even forensic experts admitted that certain injuries defied conventional categorization within known trauma patterns of cold environment fatalities. This admission only intensified speculation, as uncertainty expanded beyond scientific boundaries into psychological and environmental theory. Over time, the Dyatlov Pass incident became less about what happened and more about why it remains unsolved despite extensive evidence. Each new theory eventually collapsed under its own contradictions, unable to account for every detail preserved at the scene. And still, the mountain remains unchanged, holding its silence as if refusing to release the final truth buried beneath snow. Some researchers began to suspect that the truth might not lie in a single cause, but in a combination of rare overlapping events. A sudden weather shift, combined with human panic and terrain instability, was proposed as a multi-factor explanation for the disaster. Yet even this layered theory struggled to explain the most disturbing inconsistencies found in the medical reports of the victims. The injury suggested forces of extreme magnitude, far beyond what avalanches or falls typically produce in documented mountain accidents. At the same time, there were no clear external impact signs on the surrounding environment that would support such violent force. This contradiction continued to haunt investigators, who found themselves trapped between science and evidence that refused to align. In some accounts, survivors would have had only minutes to react before conditions turned completely lethal across the entire campsite. But the behavior of the group still defied expectations of trained mountaineers experienced in survival under harsh winter conditions. The more the case was studied, the more it appeared as though multiple realities were competing within the same frozen moment in time. International experts later joined the analysis, bringing new perspectives but still failing to produce a unified explanation. Each discipline, from meteorology to forensic science, contributed pieces of the puzzle that never fully connected. The result was a growing archive of theories rather than answers, each one partially convincing, but ultimately incomplete. Even satellite-era technology applied retroactively could not reconstruct a scenario that matched all physical evidence simultaneously. This absence of closure slowly transformed the incident into a symbol of investigative limits in extreme environments. The Dyatlov Pass case became a reference point for every unexplained expedition disaster studied in modern forensic history. Despite all progress in science, the final moments of those 9 hikers remain locked beyond the reach of certainty. And somewhere in the frozen silence of the Ural Mountains, the unanswered questions continue to endure without resolution. As the years passed, the Dyatlov Pass incident shifted from a cold case into a permanent historical enigma. New generations discovered the story not through reports, but through documentaries that deepened the mystery instead of resolving it. Every attempt to finalize the truth only added new contradictions, as if the case resisted closure by design. The frozen terrain where it happened became a silent witness to something still not fully understood by modern science. Even environmental reenactments failed to reproduce the exact combination of fear, injury, and disorientation recorded in the original investigation. Some believe that unseen natural forces acted in rare alignment, creating a situation never before or since documented in history. Others argue that human perception under extreme cold can collapse faster than physical endurance, leading to irrational mass panic. Yet neither explanation fully accounts for the precision and severity of injuries found across the scattered victims. Over time, the mystery became larger than the event itself, shaping how unexplained disasters are studied in forensic science. The Dyatlov Pass name entered global consciousness as a symbol of limits in human understanding of extreme environments. Researchers continued to debate quietly, knowing that each theory still left critical gaps, unfilled and unresolved. The mountain region itself remains remote, untouched, and unchanged, preserving the final scene exactly as nature left it. Snow still falls there without witnesses, covering ground where questions were first written into the earth. No final report has ever been universally accepted, and no single explanation has survived full scientific scrutiny. What happened that night remains divided between theory, speculation, and the fragile boundary of what can be proven. In silence, the story continues to exist, carried forward by those who cannot accept unanswered endings. The Dyatlov Pass incident endures not as a solved mystery, but as an open wound in investigative history. And even today, the frozen mountains hold their secret, refusing to reveal what truly ended 9 experienced lives. Because some places do not forget what happened within them, even when the world moves on. And some questions, once born in silence, never truly die.